He was a lighting technician, and he fell, and he was paralyzed, and he started using medical marijuana, and he became, it helped him so much that he started this whole movement, and he started this Oaksterdam, and you can attend this university, and you can learn how to grow, the legal aspects of medical marijuana, how to open a dispensary. So that's what you can do.
A real crash course in what you have to do.
Did this thing go dead? Here we go. Okay, sorry. Let's throw this one to the police members of the panel. Can you describe to us, let's start with Tim George, how life has changed since the Oregon Medical Marijuana Program came into being for your department, for your line of work?
I think is this on?
Yes.
Can't really tell if it's on or not. I think Erik.
We're writing the level, so they'll change it.
Okay, great. I think Erik would agree, and so would most police officers in this state, that marijuana, especially at this time of year, takes over a major portion of our workload. It used to be a monthly complaint process, then it became a weekly complaint process, and now it's almost a daily complaint process about folks that are taking advantage of the OMMP program and are involved in criminal acts that involve the abuse of the OMMP program. So there's no question about it, and the quote that was on the front page of the Mail Tribune, that we are swimming in weed. There's more marijuana out there than ever. It consumes us at this time. This is harvest time for an outside crop. This is also a peak time for a lot of. You'll never find marijuana cheaper than it is right now, and the amount of effort and work that goes into what we're trying to do to either audit or try and police those that are in violation of the OMP program, which would be in violation of ORS marijuana laws, is something that consumes us right now.
Erik Fisher, similar things going on at Oregon State Police?
Sure. We experience the outdoor marijuana growing season as well, which is a statewide problem, both outdoor illegal gardens that are 20, 30,000 plants, and also illegal gardens with the related to the Oregon Medical Marijuana Program. I think the big difference between what we had before medical marijuana and what we have now after medical marijuana is it's more open. It's not an underground thing. I mean, you can drive down just about any country road in most counties and see a 15-foot fence with marijuana plants behind it. So it's not hidden as much.
Lee Berger, I can see your face twisting a little bit tighter as we go on in this discussion from the members of the police. So
I thought we would start out a little more truthful, frankly. I think
well, let's get your perspective then.
The medical marijuana program, for example, reports that most of the calls this time of year just come from the southern counties, from Jackson, Josephine, Coos, Curry, Douglas County. The most of the outdoor gardens that exist are in the southern counties, overwhelmingly. And as Erik points out, the problem isn't the medical growers, people who are growing medically. The problem is these 20, 30,000 plant gardens that are happening on federal land, and it's really a question of perspective. What's different from before the Medical Marijuana Act till after the Medical Marijuana Act is that before the Medical Marijuana Act, patients were arrested and prosecuted and didn't have a defense in court. That's what was happening. What was happening before the Medical Marijuana Act is that patients were unable to cultivate for themselves or to find someone to cultivate for them and had to go to the underground market to be able to obtain the medicine that they needed to treat their debilitating medical conditions. That's what things were like before the Medical Marijuana Act. Now, there's almost 40,000 patients, and it's uncertain how many of them have access or safe access to medical cannabis because the program, the Medical Marijuana Program, which is part of the Department of Human Services, which is becoming the Oregon Health Authority, refuses to do research because they haven't been mandated by the legislature to do research. One thing that Measure 74 does is that it mandates research, and some of the funds that would be collected from the fees associated with cultivation and dispensing or producing and dispensing medical grade cannabis through a licensed and regulated system would go towards that kind of research, and we'd have that better numbers. But I've been here in Medford at Voter Power when Voter Power would be, because under the current law you can give it away for free, and Voter Power and Oregon Green Free, and I'm assuming, I don't know for sure, Southern Oregon NORML, I know Oregon NORML in Portland, and other organizations have been doing this, and people are lined up out the door because they can't find someone to cultivate for them, because they can't cultivate for themselves or they don't know how to. So in the same way that the Medical Marijuana Act made it so that patients could be accepted from, and their providers, from the criminal law, so too would Measure 74 complete the job by making sure that patients have safe access to a reliable, regulated supply of medical marijuana. And I want to add, too, about the outdoor gardens, because I know that, I mean, I grow raspberries and blueberries, and I grow Japanese eggplants, and this year in Portland we had a lousy summer, and nothing, there's hardly any tomatoes really in Portland because it's been so cold and wet, but I've seen lots of gardens in the 15 years I've focused my practice on representing patients and their providers, and I know that down here in Jackson and Josephine and Douglas and Coos and Curry County that you have, because it's such a fertile area, in Grants Pass, it's the climate, right? And it's not just a slogan, it's really true. I mean, if you plant hops in Grants Pass, they grow 8 feet tall, right? So in 2005, there was a dramatic revision of the Medical Marijuana Act, Senate Bill 1085, that went through the legislature, and advocates proposed different rules for outdoor annual gardens to try and deal with this, and law enforcement opposed it at that time. I don't remember Tim being there, and I'm sure Erik wasn't, because it was the guy, 2 guys before Erik, that was looking after the medical marijuana program for the state police. But the legislature's coming back in session, whether 74 passes or not. Some changes to the Medical Marijuana Act about outdoor gardens that are annual gardens to address some of the concerns that I know when I was on your program this week, Jeffrey, a caller called in about, may be appropriate, at least for the legislature to look at and for law enforcement and the advocates to try and see if there's some common ground we can find.
Let me invite Damian Mann and Bob Hunter to jump in with a question for a member of the panel. And this is the cue for the audience to get your ideas ready and come to the microphone in the next 5 minutes or so.
I think I would like to add one thing.
Go ahead, Erik.
And I respectfully have to clarify this. For law enforcement, it's not about medical marijuana, if you're part of the program, if you're not part of the program, if you're an illegal alien growing marijuana on public land. It's about, for law enforcement's perspective, it's about illegal trafficking of marijuana, regardless of the source. And to echo what Mr. George said, this is the time of the year that the market is flooded. And that's where we as law enforcement feel the pinch is it's everywhere. The simple supply and demand, the supply is up, demand is up, prices go down, everybody's trying to move what they have at harvest time. And regardless of the source, law enforcement doesn't care if it's program related or not. If it's illegal activity, our job is to enforce the laws that we have.
Could I respond just briefly?
Briefly. I don't want to get a filibuster going here.
No, it's not a filibuster, because I think we actually have a lot of common ground. The fact is that there is some diversion of medical cannabis that's lawfully cultivated into the underground market. My point was that it's incredibly small compared to these large plantations that are happening on federal land, is the first thing. The second thing is that Measure 74 creates an economic incentive for people who are doing that to become producers, where they can be reimbursed fully by dispensaries. I mean, I've always been surprised and disappointed that law enforcement didn't embrace this as the bite it takes out of crime. That it will take medicine that's being diverted to the underground market and send it through a regulated supply system. That's the point of it.
All right, question now from the Mail Tribune folks.
A question that I have, and maybe other folks have, I'm not entirely sure how the dispensaries would work, and Lee, you're probably the best versed in this, and if you could give us kind of a quick rundown on how would this actually work? How would people get marijuana from the dispensaries? How would the dispensaries package and sell it? How would they prevent fraud?
Well, those are good questions, Bob. But it requires a little bit of background about the Medical Marijuana Act. The Medical Marijuana Act in Oregon, enacted by the people in 1998 and amended by the legislature in 99 and in 2005, 7, and 9, is a registry identification card system. In that sense, it's different from California, where all you need is an oral or written recommendation from your physician. In Oregon, you need a physician to diagnose that you have a listed debilitating medical condition, which is a small list of physical conditions, and have the opinion that marijuana might mitigate. And it's not just any physician, it has to be an Oregon licensed medical doctor or an osteopath. And the patient who has that attending physician's statement designates a location where medical marijuana is to be grown. It's called, instead of what it should be, a medical cannabis garden, it's called a grow site, which is a law enforcement term. But they have to designate a grow site, and they have to designate a grower, even if they're not going to grow, even if they don't have any place to do it. They're required to do that. They can also designate a person who can help them by providing care, a designated primary caregiver. A patient can reimburse their grower, the person responsible for their grow site, only for supplies and utilities. And the law says specifically, not for their labor, only for supplies and utilities. That's the current law. And a grower can only be a grower for up to 4 patients. Each patient is allowed to 6 mature plants, which are not mature plants. They're plants that are taller than a foot or wider than a foot or flowering. And 18 starts or seedlings, which are under a foot and less wide than a foot and not flowering, and up to 24 ounces of usable medical marijuana, which is not hanging, drying marijuana, but usable, cured marijuana. Measure 74 would create 2 additional cards. It would create a dispensary card and a producer card. And a dispensary card, a person could become a dispensary by paying a fee to the department and organizing as a nonprofit. A dispensary would be able to be fully reimbursed by patients or by a patient's designated primary caregiver, or by another dispensary. Dispensaries would be limited to the inventory of what a grower for 4 patients currently is allowed to have. Producers would pay a higher fee, and I think the dispensary is $1,000 and the producer is $2,000. The other way around, dispensary is $2,000, thank you. Producer is $1,000, and a producer could be fully reimbursed by a dispensary, and to the extent that a producer had excess, more than what he or she was allowed to produce, that excess could be distributed freely to patients. So that's what the law would do. Now, the way that the dispensaries would be regulated is that there are some regulations that we wrote into the initiative. You can't have been convicted of certain felonies in the last 5 years, which parallels the law under the Medical Marijuana Act. You can't be within 1,000 feet of a school. You can't, you have to have a, I'm trying to remember the other, there are a series of initial regulations, and then the rest is delegated to the Oregon Health Authority to create regulations. And we know from experiences in other states, like Colorado, for example, which went through this huge boom of unregulated dispensaries, that when the legislature passed a law, the agency promulgated 96 pages, including the number of pixels that the security camera had to have at the dispensary. So we expect that the Oregon Health Authority will do that after conferring with all stakeholders. And historically, over the last 12 years anyway, and those, you know, both Jim and Christine McGarvin serve on the advisory committee for medical marijuana. Historically, the program, the law enforcement has a veto power. If the program is urged to adopt a particular regulation that law enforcement opposes, it doesn't happen. So I'm expecting that Tim and Erik and others in law enforcement will play a vital role in determining what kind of regulations they're going to be once the law passes.
Leslie Wilde, I'd like to hear from you sometime tonight. So we just heard what the dispensary system will be like in Oregon should Measure 74 pass. Tell us how that differs from what you just heard from what goes on now in California, where you run a dispensary.
Well, in California, we don't have the regulations and the ordinances yet to regulate dispensaries. So every dispensary